take us over to our course schedule so we can see where we are. We are moving along in this class. We are now module 7. Okay. And your reading responses are there. Next week, you'll be reading an essay from Mauricio Mazzucato, an excerpt of his book called The Indebted Man. I told you that Mazzucato is, I believe, the most dense reading we have in terms of like economic terms. It's not, Mazzucato is not nearly as dense. He is more of a philosopher, and he's prone to hyperbole. I'm just warning you, but I think it's quite interesting. So a different look. And then March 31st, you have your next papers due. So I'm going to share them with you all here, just go over them with you. I've had these up for a little while now because some of you guys wanted to get on them early. So your next papers are going to do March 31st. They should be due at the very end of the day. I'll check that deadline. Standard formatting, 4 to 5 pages in length, and they'll be deducted a third of a grade for each day they're late. So please don't be late. If you have a topic of your own choosing, if you don't like any of the topics I proposed, please talk to me. I think I'm going to insist for now on emails, because then I have written proof and I can, that someone's requested this. And not that there are any problems with last papers, but it's just a good idea because my memory fails me as I get older. And then, if you have your own topic that you have in mind, I would, I'd like to see you lay it out. I'd like to see you justify it and explain it to me. Because organization is pretty important when you're going off on your own there. As with the first papers, I encourage you to meet with me at any point. I don't think anybody in this class has taken me up on my offer of office hours yet, so feel free to do that. There were many of you, well, not many, I don't think so. I think papers are generally quite good in this class, but some of you who I recommended meet with a tutor in the Writing Center for the next papers. Please do that. It is, it's a service you're already paying for, and these can be arranged online. What I'm looking for: grading criteria, persuasive argumentation, clarity. By the way, these papers is a different look. The first papers, they were an interpretation of the text. This time I'm asking you to engage critically with the text. So persuasive argumentation, clarity, correct grammar and spelling, insightful comments and critiques. Footnoting, the same goes. There were a couple of you who did not footnote correctly. Those people I do want to talk to, because I need to show you how to do it. It won't be long. It'll be easy to do that. And this is still Chicago style footnote. I don't know that any of you will be citing Ta-Nehisi Coates for these papers, but I included the information again just in case. These are the prompts. Consider Mariana Mazzucato's critique of Milton Friedman's theory of the social responsibility of business. What does she find fault with? Does she make a persuasive case? How might Friedman respond? Mazzucato is critical of how tech firms celebrate themselves. They wrongly understand the nature of innovation. Explain her argument, analyze it critically. What might you add? Is there anything she overlooks? 3, Mazzucato argues that debt produces a specific morality in contemporary capitalist societies. What does he have in mind? And how does it compare with the morality of labor that Weber attributes to Protestantism, which infuses capitalism? Consider how Mazzucato and Weber's arguments compare or supplement one another. All right. There you have it. Questions? Comments? Complaints? Observations?
Looks good to me.
Nice. Anybody have any questions though? Or anything? Any issues? No? All right, well, if they occur to you, it's early. You have time to think about these. So please do, okay? And then get back to me if you need any issue, if you need any help. By the way, I'm just going to remind you all, I hope I said this the last time, But, I actually don't hate digital grading. I thought I would, but my handwriting is hard to read, so it makes it easier for you to understand my comments at least. So if you have any questions at all about my comments, I urge you to get in touch with me and we'll talk about it. Okay. I can certainly go over your papers with you. Great. Anybody, any other questions or issues about anything? All right. Gosh, I heard something in the car just an hour ago. I wanted to share with you all. I should have looked it up. I've been sending you all articles. I don't know if you get a chance to read them. Sometimes students seem to appreciate when I share articles, but I don't know if you're able to get to them all. I read a fantastic piece in the New Yorker just the other day, which I shared with you before class, about private equity moving in on what do you call them? Modular homes, or what's another word for modular homes? You guys know what I mean?
Like mobile homes? Yeah.
Mobile homes, thank you. 20 million Americans, 20 million live in mobile homes. That's a lot. And it's a big trend that's picked up since the last 20 or 30 years. Turns out it is one of the last, or it's a very popular form of affordable housing. And private equity firms are moving in there. And the article I shared with you from the New Yorker, it hits on a lot of the themes that Mazzucato points out about the bad behavior of the private equity firms. It's really, really interesting piece. Oh, but what I heard in the radio just a few minutes ago, digital redlining, it's called digital redlining. What do you think digital redlining is?
Maybe this is just as me, like a hunch, but perhaps I guess it has to do with the access that Black and brown communities have to internet and digital resources. I don't know.
Cool. Good. Who's that? Sean.
Yeah, I remember a year ago or so, I read something about how a lot of black credit scoring systems often disproportionately affect Black and brown communities and negatively impact them.
Mm-hmm.
So that might be what it's referring to.
Very good. Shout out to Rachel heaving her cat out of the way. I was worried you were going to toss the cat, and that would look a little better in the end. Good. As to the definition of digital redlining, Jennifer nailed it. You're totally correct, Sean, about what you're reporting. I don't know exactly how that relates in this case. I'm sure it does. If I find a substantiating article, I will send it to you. But here in Baltimore City, and I'm not sure where you all are, digital redlining is a big issue, of course, because city residents, public school kids in the city, they're having a much rougher go of COVID, because learning at home in stressful environments is tough. A lot of poor homes in the city, they're a lot more stressed. And also the internet access is just a disaster. I was talking with a man the other day who runs it's like a charter school in the city for low income kids. And he said basically he had to ask donors to go around and boost the internet connections of the families themselves, because they just couldn't do the schooling otherwise. Jennifer, is that Prince George's? Yeah. Good. Yeah, I mean, this whole, we've been talking a lot about inequality throughout this class, and a lot of economists and political scientists, as they're now starting to think hard about COVID and what this episode has done, is they've reflected on how inequality, led to such different outcomes for people, and how this COVID chapter has worsened inequalities. I mean, we regularly see how mortality rates among Black and Brown communities are much higher than white communities. In Maryland here, we're having a big fight between the city and the governor. I don't know if you guys are paying attention to that, but the governor, who's from Harford County, which is traditionally a pretty conservative county, not big fans of the city. He's complaining that the city is getting too much access to vaccines. Anybody been vaccinated? Show of hands. Let me see. Oh my God. All right. Evan, are you raising your hand because you were, or you want to say something?
Yeah, I was vaccinated.
Nice. God, only two of you. I had to take my kids. My kids they're deemed essential workers in the state of Maryland because they're helping with the food bank during COVID. So I took their teenagers. I took them down to Raven Stadium, and that was a process, about an hour. I don't know if I told you guys, I got vaccinated a few weeks ago. I went to Six Flags Park, woohoo, in Bowie, Maryland, sat in my car. It was the National Guard en masse. I mean, that was an impressive operation. I was singing the national anthem the whole time because I was proud to be an American at that moment. But the city so the governor's complaining that the city is getting too much access to the vaccine. And yet the Baltimore Sun revealed yesterday that there is about a 5% discrepancy between the city and the rest of the state in terms of residents who have been vaccinated. So what's going on? Baltimore City is getting the vaccines, but not the residents. You guys know who the biggest employer in Baltimore City is? Baltimore City. No. Good guess, though. It's Hopkins. Yeah. Johns Hopkins is the biggest employer. They employ 30,000 people. Only a small portion of those people live in the city. So when the governor talks about all the vaccines going to Baltimore City, that includes all the people who work in the hospital sector in Baltimore City, like the University of Maryland Medical Center is another huge employer, tens of thousands of people, MedStar. Biotech is the biggest field in Baltimore City right now that industry is gone, biotech and service industry. So the residents aren't getting it. The residents of Baltimore City are not getting it. About digital redlining. Oh, right. I was talking about inequality. So, we're seeing now, and in terms of education, of course, it looks like, if you're from a middle-class suburban school district, you're going to be okay. But if you're from a low-income school district, I think they said, I don't know, has anybody heard about this in Baltimore City, the number of Fs that they're giving around? It's pretty astonishing. It was on the order of double or triple what students are normally failing, because there's simply, it's just such a disaster. Anyway. All right. So I had another article I shared with you all. We should talk about this new legislation, the COVID-19 relief law. 1.9, what was it? 1.7 trillion or something dollars. And I'm looking for the name of it. I think it's called like the COVID Rescue Bill. It is one of the biggest pieces of the most expensive pieces of legislation in the nation's history. I sent you an article by David Brooks, columnist from the New York Times, and he pointed out that the United States spent 4.8 trillion in today's dollars, that is inflation adjusted. America spent $4.8 trillion in today's dollars fighting World War II. Over the last year, 1 year, we have spent $5.5 trillion fighting COVID. We've spent more fighting COVID than World War II. And this bill by Joe Biden is very expansive. It is more than just trying to, piece together his paychecks. There are several measures here to fight poverty, to combat childhood poverty, to subsidize health insurance and the like. So it is a very big bill. And of course, we spent some time in this class talking about inflation. The big concern, at least on the right, is going to be that government spending is out of control. And I'm not sure how much money, people are going to get. It's going to vary. Has anybody here received checks from this bill?
My mom received money for me as a dependent already.
You know how much it was?
It's $1,400 per person, so she got $2,800.
Yeah. For dependents. Good. I need it. I have a couple dependents. If it's income adjusted. So if families are earning between $8,000 and $12,000, like in a check, I got notice from the IRS the other day that the money's going to be deposited right in my checking account. What am I going to spend it on, people? A brighter green shirt? Absolutely. That boat? Chloe's right. Chloe, damn you for being responsible. My wife appreciates that. A really nice pillow.
Mine is going towards rent, so.
Yeah. It's always a debate. It's an eternal debate about what people are going to spend that money on, right? Do you guys know which companies? Last year was a really, really rough year for the economy. Do you guys know which companies did really well? I think this has come up. Who did really well? I'm sorry?
Tesla.
Tesla, they did. Amazon, Rachel points out. Walmart killed it.
Food delivery services like Grubhub.
Mm-hmm.
Streaming services.
Which one?
I think just in general. I mean, Rachel said Netflix and Disney, but in general.
Entertainment services. Yeah. Walmart always does very well, and I imagine Amazon will as well. Like the big, what we call big box stores, Target, they always do really well when there are cash payments. Purell, probably. They always do really well when there are big cash payments to the American public, because, that's what people are going to spend their money on. That's what they have to spend their money on, So, it'll be really interesting to analyze where these cash disbursements go. This is a lot of cash. This is a big one. The first cash disbursement from Trump last year was, I think it was around $6,000, wasn't it? Like on average, and this new one is 14,000. That was at least or at least maybe that's the high water mark that President Biden wanted to hit. So this is going to be at least doubly as generous this time. So, what will people do with it? They could save it. They could pay down debt. They could buy stock, depending on who they are. Generous is a strong word. Okay. Well, it's more generous than the last one. I hear you, but it's a lot of cash. So just from a strictly economic standpoint, this is a lot of cash that is about to hit the American economy. Okay. And when a lot of cash hits the American economy, the fear is inflation. Or remember Reagan's definition: too many dollars chasing too few goods. Ronald Reagan, that's his quote. There's a lot of cash out there driving the price of things up. So will we see inflation? That is the worry. And what David Brooks says in this article here is that for years, both parties, although curiously, mostly the Democrats, were encumbered by the fear of inflation. So they tried to be very reasonable in their spending, and suddenly their spending proposals. And then suddenly with this bill, they said, fuck it. And now they are just going high hog. And why is that? Well, he says, this is a quote from that article. He says it was assumed only a decade ago that the Fed could not just print money with abandon. It was assumed that the government could not rack up. That's, by the way, when it just gives you money digitally into your accounts, that's printing money with abandon. It was assumed that the government could not rack up huge debt without spurring inflation and crippling debt payment costs. Both of these concerns have been thrown out the window by a large number of thinkers. We've seen years of high debt and loose monetary policy, but inflation has not come. So people are betting on the fact that we will continue not to see inflation, and the devastating the impact that can leave. Here, that's the article. I put it in the chat. Does anybody have any questions about the bill, or any observations or comments I think I should mention?
I personally know a lot of people who are planning on only spending it on rent or paying bills. So I just wonder how that would change. Like, I mean, if they're anticipating that we're going to spend it all on Amazon and stuff again, I don't know. Like, we've been in this for a year. I feel like in the beginning, those stimulus checks did sort of feel like to people ways to spend their money to get through the pandemic. But now we feel kind of stuck in it and like getting real about what to keep us above water at this point. I mean, maybe there are people who aren't in that situation that feel like they can just spend it on whatever, but I don't know. Everyone around me is just like, it's going towards rent and that's it. Like, I currently owe BGE way more than I should. So
Nice. Any other comments or questions? Yeah, I mean, it's you know, last year, some of the bigger measures of the previous relief package were to help small businesses survive. I have a friend who's a restaurant owner, and he kept me abreast of the measures that were given to keep them afloat. A lot of restaurants couldn't make it, but many governments in your local jurisdictions tried very hard. And landlords sorry, I should say, like, if you had a mortgage, the banks were giving forgiveness of missed mortgage payments. And you know, what's so strange about this curious recession, this COVID recession, is thanks to such aggressive government effort, and you know, it's a very proactive approach. I read numerous points that the GDP, the gross domestic product, this last year actually rose in America. It did not fall, because there's been so much government spending to try and fill up the gap. And as you guys have noted, it you know, it was uneven, and it, you know, didn't exactly help everybody in this, you know, entirely in the same way. But on the whole, the economy itself has seen a boost. We should talk about one thing, by the way. I think we should probably talk about. We should talk about debt. We should talk about treasury bills. Has anybody ever heard of treasury bills, aka T-bills? You guys know what treasury bills are? So one thing you're hearing around this COVID package is that the United States deficit is going to grow, right? And the deficit is the collection of you know, the shortfall in spending and saving that leads to our national debt, right? And our national debt now is on the order of a couple $1 trillion. And people have long wondered about how the US government is able to sustain this kind of debt. Well, a treasury bill is another word for a bond. Okay? Every municipality has a bond. Actually, there are also corporate and nonprofit bonds. Micah issues bonds. A bond, like a stock, is something that a corporation can create, or a nonprofit or a government can create if it wants to raise money. Okay. One way of understanding a stock, y'all, is a stock is a way of borrowing money. You're just borrowing it from shareholders. Okay. But then it floats on the market and it can rise or fall in price. A bond does not. A bond is steady. So Baltimore City issues bonds. And they issue these bonds when they want to pay for roads, sewers, and the like. The problem is their bonds are not highly rated. They're not a very attractive investment product. So they have to pay very high interest rates in order to attract investors. And the reason that Baltimore City bonds are not a very attractive investment product is because Baltimore City, you may have noticed, has a very strained tax base. It's not able to pay its bills. There is a chance it might go bankrupt. The city of Detroit went bankrupt, and all those people who had bought Detroit bonds were screwed. Every municipality, when it has infrastructure to pay for, it issues bonds. Okay. The US government is the biggest bondholder, is one of the biggest bondholders in the world. And here's the thing. The US government is an extremely attractive investment product. The bonds that the US government issues are a very popular investment product all over the world. And why is that? Well, it seems the main reason is that the United States government is stable, is very stable. I know that may sound funny because in January we had a bunch of guys who tried to run over the Capitol. But think about it. The United States government in its current form has been around for 200 plus years. I can't think of any other governments that have lasted that long. The French are in their like fourth republic now, their fifth republic. So the United States democracy is very long lasting. It's very stable. It's a very attractive investment for people. And so here's the thing, guys. The United States government does not have to work hard to attract investors. So they can offer low interest rates. And here's what you need to understand. The interest rates that the United States offers to people who buy their bonds, right, are linked to the interest rates on your credit cards and mortgages. What does this mean? This means that so long as interest rates on our government debt is low, so will be the interest rates on the shit you want to, for the debt, for the things you want to buy. So one of the biggest holders of US debt are Chinese investors. The Chinese have been buying US debt for years. What happens? Why is that a good idea for them? They buy our debt. They keep our interest rates low. And how does that benefit them?
They have, I guess, at least partial say in the interests of our government because they control the purse strings.
How do the Chinese how does the Chinese government and the Chinese investors, how would they like us Americans to behave? You feel me, Sean?
Because if our interest rates are low, then we have more money to buy all of their products that they manufacture and then get shipped over here.
Yes, here I'm going to do a party little emoji because you fucking nailed it. I love you for that. I'm crying. You get the picture. Do you guys understand how this works? It's actually an amazing symbiotic relationship. The Chinese buy our debt. They drive our interest rates down. And then we Americans could buy more shit that they make. Not to say this shit. Just saying, we tend to be very hungry consumers, right? And it is in the interests of the Chinese that we continue this appetite, right? The fact that the United States debt is a very appealing investment product the world over, this has another remarkable effect. Our government can borrow unlimited amounts of money. It means, as David Brooks is insinuating in his column, it means that debt does not matter anymore to the US government, because there will always be people the world over lined up to buy our debt. Cheap, right? All right. Anybody have any questions about what I just explained to you all? We will be talking a little bit about bonds today, a little bit. And then, Daniel, someone should buy my debt. Yeah, but what's your interest rate, Daniel, right? You have to offer a big old interest rate to get people to buy it. Perhaps, unless you're a stable investment, right? Actually, later in the class, we'll be talking about radical ideas for subsidizing college tuition. And there is an idea proposed to like invest in you all in your future careers, and you can make payments on like, so you can be like the target of venture capital, right? Like, I'm going to be a rocket entrepreneur. You should invest in me now. Good. And Micah, by the way, issues bonds as well. They built those new dorms there. They're not new anymore. I forget the names of them. They're the ones on Mosher there, I think, across from the school. What's the name of those fancy dorms they built down the street from the Gateway?
Gateway.
No, down the street from it.
Leak.
Leak.
Yeah.
Yeah. Founders Green. Thank you.
Yeah.
They floated, it's called floating bonds. They floated bonds in order to finance. Basically, they were borrowing money from investors, and a bond ensures a fixed income. It's a fixed payment. Stocks is a fluctuating one, bonds are fixed. And by the way, during this economic crisis over the last year, Micah had to cut faculty, or not faculty, but cut, there were staff members cut, there were staff members furloughed, faculty salaries were cut, all kinds of services were cut. One of the concerns, the financial concerns of the administration, was Micah's bond rating. Why that matters is because if when Micah needs to borrow money again to do whatever, like they built the Dolphin building, who knows what they're going to. They bought that building next to Bunting, which sits next to the 83. I forget who's going in there, which department's going in there. But if or when they want to redevelop that, they're going to need to, FYE, thank you, they're going to need to borrow money from the banks. And so the first thing the bank is going to say is, I want to see your bond rating. And my understanding is our bond rating is BBB+. I don't know what that means, but according to our chief financial officer, it ain't bad. So he was worried it would take a bigger hit. Consider this also an important preparatory talk for next week when we'll be talking about Mazzucato's indebted man. Okay. All right. Anybody have any questions about any of this business I've been talking about? Joe Biden, the COVID relief bill, bonds, and the like.
What is your opinion on what it's going to do?
What?
Like, do you think that the spike in inflation is going to happen, or do you think that the weird trend of no increased interest rates and inflation is going to continue?
I'm very honored you asked me, like you think I know, so I will do my best. And I say that only because there's so many economists who don't seem to know. My personal opinion is that I don't think inflation is coming. I don't. And the reason I say that is because I don't know if I've mentioned this in class, but one of the big anchors of inflation throughout the economy is the price of gasoline. I think I have mentioned that. And the last 10 years, the United States, the price of gas in America has been historically low. And it's largely because, do you guys know why the price of gas is so low, relatively speaking? Abundance. Yes. Where from? Who's the biggest oil producer in the world right now? No to any of those in the chat. Who's the biggest oil producer in the world? USA. When did that happen? The last 10 years. Do you guys know why? There was a development of a new kind of technology that enabled the United States to become the biggest oil producer in the world. What is it? Come on, you environmentalists. There we go, fracking, short for hydrofracturing, right? This enabled the United States to access gas in, throughout the country, right? And so the United States is the biggest oil producer in the whole world. And the result of that is that flooded the market with oil. This was cheap oil. And that was great for American consumers. But when oil is cheap like that, it has a ripple effect, right? Because think about how many things, think about how many, the price of anything you buy has to somehow factor in the price of oil, right? The milk you buy at the store, it was transported there, right? The grapes you buy, there was oil used by the tractors to harvest them, and so it goes, so when the price of oil is low, that acts like an anchor and it pulls the price of everything down. So the real question, Daniel, is if that is going to continue. I thought it was, except that I read last week, OPEC, someone mentioned OPEC. I forget what OPEC stands for. Oil producing something countries. Oil, anybody know what OPEC is? Anyway. And this is, the United States is not part of OPEC. This is the countries of the Middle East and Venezuela, okay? And they effectively work like a kind of cartel. And they have long been in the habit of manipulating the price of oil. And here's how they do it. If they want the price of oil to rise, well, I'll ask you all, how do you think OPEC would limit, how do you think OPEC would manipulate the price of oil to rise? Withholding exactly what Chloe said. They basically they limit supply. And if they want to, if they want to drive the price down for whatever reason, they did that recently. Saudi Arabia did that recently because they wanted to try and put the Russians out of business. They didn't succeed, but they wanted to really put the hurt on Russian competitors. They opened up the gates, flooded the world market with oil to really, and let the price plummet. This last year, the oil producers had such a hard go of it. They decided, this is the American oil producers, they have now decided they're going to copy what the Saudis did, and they're going to start limiting supply. And what that means is they're going to let the price of oil rise, and they're going to let the price of gas rise. So, Daniel, if the price of gas does rise over the next year, then I think we will see inflation.
I hope they don't do that.
Well, they are. The economists said they are. It's a question of how much, right? It's also a question of how reliant we are on that resource. You know, across the economy, we are slowly but surely being released of our reliance on oil. You know, so maybe maybe it will be less impactful. Is that legal? Yeah, it is. I believe so. That's an excellent question. I'm sure they could be accused of like anti-competitive behavior and maybe sued for antitrust infractions, you know, but that's a good question. Any other questions? All right. Well, let's dive into Mazzucato because she covered a lot of really important things today. I also have some things I want to share with you. I got you know, we had that this conversation about our about tuition at Micah and college in general, and so I emailed our CFO, our chief financial officer, Mike. I said, hey, you know, I'm talking about this with my students in my class. Can you share with me the breakdown of how Micah's endowment is invested? And he sent me something, and I will show it to you. And it overlaps with what Mazzucato is talking about. Okay, so I'm going to take, what I'm going to do is I'm going to back up, I'm going to review a little bit from last week. You know, just to set us up where we are today. There were some really good readings today on the tech industry and big pharma. Related to the reading the pharmaceutical industry, I did find out some things about Pfizer and their vaccine. So that is coming too. So she points out, you know, that one of the main arguments she makes last week is that, you know, about the rise of the financial industry. Asset management in particular. This is a growing, booming market. And why is that? It's because, you know, every average person, you know, has to invest money now. Part of the reason is because, you know, Social Security is not sufficient, right? The Social Security deductions that are taken out of your paycheck, they are not sufficient to last you through in retirement. By the way, what's the average life expectancy today in America? 72. Really? I thought that was higher than that. I know it fell during COVID.
78.
Yeah. And I don't know what average life expectancy was in the 30s, but just imagine when Social Security was implemented in the 30s, right? Life expectancy, you guys can Google that shit, but I'm just going to throw it out there and guess. Maybe it was like 65, right? That's a big difference, right? You are on the hook for a lot more years of your own, you know, retirement. By the way, you guys know how the wonder kids in Silicon Valley, like Jeff Bezos, do you know how long they expect to live? This is a big topic for them. Look at that, Chloe. God love the internet. 62, 58 for men because they were smoking. 58 for men, 62 for women. Now it's 79. That's a huge difference. That's almost 20 years. Peter Thiel. You guys know Peter Thiel? Peter Thiel, not a very nice man. He has his eye on 120 years. 120, y'all. That's double the 1960s. How long are you going to live for? You guys might be kicking around close to 100, right? If the drugs don't catch up with you. But they will sooner or later. That's a long time you're going to be retired. When they first enacted Social Security, it looked like that was going to be enough. They're like, oh gosh, these guys, they only live to 60. Let's give them Social Security. They'll only need it for like 2 years, then they'll be gone. Now people are hanging around till they're 80. And, so there's a lot more interest, of course, in people. You have to invest your money. So one of the biggest sources of investment in Wall Street are the pension funds. And I explained to you how it works for me. Here's another change, by the way. Up until the 1970s, when manufacturing was very prominent in America, you were given a pension by, if you were an industrial worker, manufacturer, you were given a pension by your firm. That model is gone, right? Many companies don't give it all, to your retirement. They leave it all up to Social Security. Or what more do is they will do what are called contributions. Okay. And I told you that in my case at MICA, and some of you all there, I think you all have parents who are teachers. There's a very powerful pension fund called TIA CREF, and that is a pension fund for people in the education sector. And the way it works is that I put a portion of my weekly income, like 6%, in to my retirement, and MICA matches that. Except they took away my match during COVID, which sucks because the stock market is booming and I'm not. I know, Jessica, it's quite awful. Any case, but so this is very, this may be your retirement scheme when you find an employer. It may be, rude. Well, a lot of them did. So this is all my way of telling you that, like, asset management is huge, and it's an exploding sector of the economy. She talks about this on 141 and 142 about how these pension funds are so big. By the way, some of the other big investors, the California State Pension Fund is huge. It's one of the biggest. The New York State Pension Fund, these are also very big. And with all this appetite for investment, the financial sector, the banks, have been under pressure to create products. There are stocks that exist, and that is a hot commodity, but there are others. There are hedge funds. This is one form of investment product that has really developed in the last 20 or 30 years. She describes this on page 144. By the way, in the hedge fund, she gives a very small definition of it here. I'll call your attention to it. She says, hedge funds are tricky to define. One of their chief characteristics is shorting, betting on the price of investments falling, as well as going long, betting on the price of investments rising. A hedge fund hedging is another word for betting, right? And so they're essentially betting. She goes on, ironically, this was originally intended to take the risk out of their speculative investments by enabling them to hedge upwards against downward price movements. Don't worry about the details of it. Look at the implications. In practice, it lets them chase superior rewards by placing expensive one-way bets, often using high borrowing or leverage. Hedge funds borrow a lot of money. They take very risky bets that have the potential for high cash out. They are using high borrowing to multiply their gains from tiny differences in price. Compared to other managed funds, hedge funds also have a high portfolio turnover and invest in a wide range of assets, from property to commodities. By the way, the paragraph before that, one of the one of the most remarkable examples of a hedge fund manager who cashed in, and I know you've heard of him, is George Soros. He is vilified by QAnon for whatever reason. George Soros, in the previous paragraph, she points out he shot into the headlines, went on in 1992. He broke the Bank of England, making $1 billion betting against British membership of the European exchange rate mechanism. Basically, he bet on the value of the English pound, whether it was going to rise or fall. And he bet so much money on a very incremental difference that he reaped $1 billion from it. So that's an example of a hedge fund. I'm not going to get into more details on that. I'm much more comfortable talking about private equity. Private equity is another form of investment product. Private equity. We did get to talk about that a little bit, so I'm going to turn it over to you all. What does private equity refer to? Anybody remember? You can roll right into why it's controversial, because that's my next question. Yeah, Jesse.
Isn't it when an investment firm will like basically purchase a company and then like lay off a whole bunch of people, driving the stock price up, and then like basically just like strip it to its bare bones and then leave after like 3 to 5 years?
Good. Excellent. Anybody else want to supplement what he said? I need to explain what that term. Oh, here we go, Daniel. Yeah, extracted value through false progress. Good. I have to explain the word private. You guys know the difference between a public company and a private company? Yeah, not on the stock market. Error, that is not correct. Public does not mean it's government owned. Teresa, were you going to chime in?
Oh, no, Jesse already said it.
Good. I know public usually means government owned, but in this case, it does not. It means that it is traded on the stock market. It's owned by investors. A private company is not. A private company is typically owned by like a family or a couple of, the original investors. Anybody know what the biggest private company in the world is? I'll give you a hint. You buy furniture there. S.E. Johnson.
IKEA?
Daniel, you're so funny. IKEA. IKEA is the biggest private company in the world, which means you will not find it on the stock market. It's owned by a family. Most shares are owned by a family, privately held. Companies start out as private entities, and then at a certain point, they may decide to go public. And what it means to go public is that they are now going to sell shares to the public. And they do this in what are called IPOs, initial public offerings. Anybody know any companies that had an IPO recently? This usually makes a lot of news.
Didn't Bumble, the dating app?
They did?
I think so.
Hey, I didn't get in on that.
Yeah.
I know what I'm using my stimulus check on. I think Uber went public not too long ago, right? And when they go public, investors stand around and snatch up that stock. Why would a company go public? Traditionally, it's when they want to expand. Because, like I said, when you create stock and sell stock, that's effectively like borrowing money. So like a restaurant chain that's doing well for a while, it might be privately owned, and they decide, okay, now we want to expand into a new market. Let's go public. Let's sell shares. When we attract investment, then we have more money to spend on building new restaurants. Okay. That's traditionally how it works. Not always. She does get into some deeper criticisms of IPOs later. To private equity. Private equity, another term, so what a private equity firm is not publicly owned. It is owned by private investors. They may buy a public company, but when they do, they effectively take it off the stock market. And then, as Jesse indicated and Daniel, they dismember it as they see fit, and they take out the choice morsels. They sell off the assets. I mean, this is how they often operate. Not always, but they're accused of operating in pretty rough fashion. If you get around to reading my article that I sent you about the mobile home business, you'll see like they raise rents really quickly to try and extract value. They will not spend money on infrastructure or the upkeep of their properties they own because they're trying to make cash, right? She points out that one way that when private equity takes over a company, they very often engage in downsizing. That means they're cutting costs, right? They may wish to sell off certain assets to raise money that are valuable. And then she points out that private equity firms also, they transfer debt. They transfer debt to the company that they bought. This is one of their most devious mechanisms. They buy a company. They may be very heavily indebted. They buy a company, they transfer the debt to those books, they sell off that company indebted and a shell of itself. So this is why they tend to be rather controversial. Anybody have any questions? All good? All right. Just gonna plug in my computer here before I lose everybody. Well, this is, there's one other investment product that we need to talk about that's kind of like a highfalutin, exotic investment products. And what all these investment products have in common is that they can be quite damaging to she thinks that they're quite damaging to the economy as a whole for reasons we'll see. But there's also what is called venture capital. The short is VC. Sorry, just plugging this in. My question is going to be, what is it? Just getting you ready. There. What's venture capital? Who knows? Anybody know what venture capital is? You hear it a lot in terms of Silicon Valley.
Google says it's a form of private equity fundraising that is for newer businesses or startup businesses that they believe have long-term potential.
There you go. I'm trying to see where that comes up in your book. She doesn't really talk about it much in the chapter with private equity. I think it came up today a little bit when she's talking about Silicon Valley. Venture capital, yeah, these firms are very powerful. You guys all, my kids like the Shark Tank. You know that show, the Shark Tank? Venture capital is kind of like the Shark Tank. You got yourself a nice, fancy startup idea, but you need to raise money. You go to the venture capitalists and you're like, hey, I'm going to do this. Do you want in? And they will say, yes, we are in, but these are our conditions. We want these terms. We want this much equity, this much ownership, this share of the profits, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. She complains in your reading for today, she complains that venture capital takes a lot of credit and then they hog a lot of the profits, but they essentially don't really do much. They'd like to just come in after all the risks have been taken. Pretty shitty business. All right, now, here's where I'm going to make a quick turn. I'm going to talk about endowments. Okay, you ready? I'm going to show you the Harvard endowment. Here you go. Biggest endowment in the world, biggest university endowment. I forget, what did we say, guys? 16 billion? What are they invested it in? Domestic equity. Equity, everybody, in this context means stocks. When you heard the word equities, that means stocks. So they have, so 10% are invested in American stocks. 7% over on the other side, let me use my arrow here. 7% foreign stocks, domestic bonds. That could be, although I doubt it, Baltimore City bonds, but it could be. Emerging market equity, those are high risk stocks. I do not know what absolute return is. Real estate, 15%. Look at private equity. That's the biggest. Those motherfuckers.
What's natural resources? Exactly.
What do you think?
Like oil, fracking, that kind of stuff? Or
Hey, have you guys heard about these college endowments and the oil business?
Didn't Micah have, or maybe still currently have, investments in oil? That's what the whole divestment thing was about.
Divestment. A lot of the universities across the country have seen divestment movements. I suspect Harvard had a divestment movement. So I don't know what those natural resources refer to. The oil, everybody could have been included in domestic equities. It could have been stocks in like Exxon. But to see it like natural resources like this, that Branton, you raise an excellent question. I don't know what that means. Like, do they own woods? Do they own a forest somewhere? Do they own a river?
they own an oil well or something?
They own their own oil well. But like I said, they have been, these, these college endowments have been really pressured to divest from that. And then various different types of bonds. Foreign bonds, that might be bonds in other other nations, maybe like Germany or whatnot. I'm going to stop for a second because I saw there were some questions. Oh, just some snarky comments. All right, you ready to see Micah's?
Wait, one is a real question though. Like,
What is it? Tell me.
like, do they think that they own their own means for supplying natural gas or electricity to the campus if they're using a lot of electricity for labs or something like that?
I don't know. That's an excellent question. It's in their endowment though. If they were talking about the natural resources to run their labs, that would be under their their operating, what's called their operating budget. This is strictly investment. Okay. So the Micah endowment, I'm just warning you all, is far less impressive. This is what I got. After I pressed our CFO. And by the way, these terms are explained below. So 108 million compared to, don't forget, 16 billion. Fixed income, 20%, real assets, 7%, diversifiers, 10%, growth engine. Okay, what does this mean? Here we go. Growth engine, US and international stocks. So 60% of the Micah endowment, 66% of the Micah endowment is invested in stocks. Look at that, private equity and venture capital. All right. Diversifiers, they are invested in hedge funds. Real assets, that's real estate. Natural resources again, goddamn. I gotta find out about that, people. I'm writing that down. And then fixed income, that refers to treasury bills, US government bonds that produce a fixed income. All right, questions, comments? No? Nobody's got anything?
Well, is the Micah Upstart competition, when they fund student projects, does that funding turn into some kind of investment in that student's company, or is that money just freely given to the winning students?
I don't know, but I suspect that that is a donated funds that are used. You know, I suspect that's a totally different allotment of cash. Any other questions? Well, I'll give one comment. I was a little dismayed how unspecific this is, but you know, I thought I might get a little more of a breakdown. I was kind of interested to see what specific companies Micah has invested in, but I didn't get to see that. So
I'm curious about why they just put all of it into one category of growth engine, like why they can't be honest about what numbers are going where. Like at least Harvard told us like the percentages of each investment. Micah's hiding things, and they always use like certain like code words and brand names like growth engine. It sounds like better than what it actually is.
well, I would say those are probably terms that come from the financial industry. I don't think Micah came up with the term growth engine. Their little pie chart is much less like, it's a little more general. Like they compressed, like you notice that natural resources was not set off on its own. It was part of a blob, right? So they seem just a little more general. By the way, I forgot to indicate one other thing here. At the bottom, it says endowment spending policy, 5% of 36-month rolling average. Okay. And that's pretty, I'm told that's pretty standard for higher education. You don't take more than 5% of your endowment. And as I indicated to you, in Micah's case, they use the vast majority of that money for financial aid. Now, don't do the math because you're art students and you weren't expected to do the math, but just imagine 5% of 100 million versus 5% of 16 billion. Harvard's got 5% of 16 billion to play with, right? How many Harvard kids get financial aid? What do you think? Just roughly. You think a lot? What do you think? I don't think so. I don't think so. Did I tell you, you know, Harvard could pay for something like 4 entire university classes, like a freshman, sophomore, and junior year. They could pay for their tuition for 3 years completely. Harvard could. They don't need to charge tuition at all. But that's something else. All right. Any other comments or questions about that endowment business? All right. Well, it just gives you an idea of, you know, college endowments are no different from pension funds, right? They are investing where they see the, you know, the possibility of income, possibility of profit. I did tell you though, you know, at least in my own retirement fund, and this may very likely be a case for you or for your parents, is that you can choose where your money will be invested, right? I was offered hedge funds. I said no. And it wasn't because I'd read this book. I'm not sure why I said it. We have a quote here from Daniel Carhuff. The basics in a typical 50% of our received need, 20% have total incomes less than, okay, thank you. Cool. All right. So let me press on, everybody. A couple points. She tells us on page 148, the big, you know, finance gravitated towards fewer large banks. What we see now is that the finance industry, just like the tech industry, is not technically monopoly. It's oligopoly. How do you say it? Oligopoly. I think oligopoly. It means just it's run by a few, right? So you know who the main people are in the tech sector. You got your Apple, Amazon, Google, and anybody else?
Microsoft.
Oh, and Facebook. Those 5. That's your oligopoly. Thank you. In the banks, you have JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, Wells Fargo. That's good enough. You know, you got a couple. IBM is not, is my understanding, but I don't know. I plead ignorance. And she tells us, why is this? Well, it has turned out this way because there is so much appetite for risk. There is so much appetite for risky investment. The banks found that they're able to take on more risk the bigger they are. And the bigger they are, who's going to back them up, everybody? Who's going to bail them out? Uncle Sam. You, me. That's what happened in 2008. The banks were in big trouble and they were deemed too big to fail. It's great when you're too big to fail. When you're too big to fail, when you employ too many people, and when their retirements are too bound up in your investments and too reliant on you, then the government will step in to bail you out. And so long as that deal is in place, this gives the banks that makes them more willing to take on risky investment. Now, there are a lot of critics who've turned around and said to the bank, you shouldn't take on these risky credits precisely because the US taxpayer is going to bail you out. But that argument has pretty much fallen on deaf ears. The other point she tells us here, and this is around page 155, that, well, actually, a different argument, page 149, just so we're clear on what she's talking about here, the argument that she's building up. She says on 149, towards the bottom, financialization enables investment bankers and fund managers who picked the right stock, often by chance, to make profits that would previously have gone to those who built the right product by painstaking design. And having captured this value, they invariably race to extract it, channeling the gain into real estate or other financial investments designed to hold their value rather than reinvesting it in more innovative production. Last week, we dealt with the term rentism. I put it in the chat. It's trying to extract income, not by producing anything, right? And so her claim is that the financial industry is extracting income by not doing anything productive for the US economy. In the case of private equity, we saw they actually are actively destroying jobs, right? And the other point is the great profits that they gain, they don't reinvest them in production. They disperse them to shareholders. Now, the other problem, this is an example of the rentism we're talking about. She tells us that, you know, there has been a proliferation of investment fees. They have been multiplying. When you sell a stock, the broker makes a penny. When you buy a stock, the broker makes a penny. When an investment product is created, the bank makes some money. So with each of these transactions, there's money to be extracted. And what kind of emphasis has that led to? That has led to, she says this leads to the emphasis on short-term returns, right? Instead of buying a stock and holding it for long term, if the banks are getting money at each transaction, they want you to buy and sell and buy and sell. They love the idea of what's called day trading. You might have heard about day traders. They love day traders because you're generating fees with every transaction. But short-term returns, she points out, that has a harmful effect on the economy, right? That means that the economy, is highly fluctuating, moving up and down all over the place. It's highly volatile is the point, right? And investors, it's harmful when investors are not locked into a business for a very long term, right? And they're only interested in the short-term profit. Let me pause there for a second, see if anybody has any questions. Anybody have anything? I am going to be covering some ground today because we do have some important things to get through. So next week we can have more of a free-flowing conversation, but I want to make sure we cover some very important things in Mazzucato. Chapter 6, she talks about the financialization of the real economy. And what this refers to, this was also part of reading last week. I'm just finishing that up before we get into today's. It's basically that how all the other, the rest of the economy, corporations, they all behave like financial companies. They've all learned the lessons of finance and they want to make money in the way that finance does. And she points out, this is on page 162, Ford Motor Company, right? You might think that Ford makes cars. They don't. They make loans. They do make cars too, but it turns out they make more money from their loans. One of the biggest lenders that had to get bailed out in 2008 is GMAC, and GMAC is the lending arm of General Motors. Okay. So companies recognize that there's money to be made in lending money. By the way, next week when we turn to Mazzucato, we'll see the reason these companies are eager to lend is also because Americans are not great at saving money. They have to borrow money to buy stuff. So, but here's an interesting thing. The investment world, the finance market has also figured out that you can make an investment product by bundling loans. In 2008, we saw that they were bundling mortgages. What does that mean? A mortgage is actually an appealing investment product to some. You can ask your parents this. As soon as you buy a house and you create a mortgage, it's going to be bought by another bank the next day. It's crazy. Everybody I know who's had, hang on a second. Jesus Christ, kids. Okay, so a mortgage is a great investment product. Why is it a great investment product? Because you have to pay on a monthly basis. It's a regular income. So when you buy a house and you sign the dot on the mortgage, guess what? The next day or the next week, you're going to get a letter in the mail saying your mortgage has been bought by Pacific Bank of San Diego, some crazy thing. These banks are always buying other mortgages because they love the income. The big banks had a great idea about 20 years ago to bundle mortgages. And in so bundling mortgages, they create an investment product, okay? Not only do they bundle mortgages, they bundle all kinds of loans. They bundle car loans as well. What I'm trying to say is that the lending arm of these companies is of interest to the investment sector of the economy. These loans can be bundled to create investment products. Okay. I want to talk about one more thing here before. Oh yeah, go for it.
I'm just a little confused by the term bundling. Is it like used in the way that like progressive commercials used it? Like,
no,
I'm so
I know
confused.
what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised this. It's a topic that I find of huge interest. Bundling mortgages was actually conceived as a way to extend mortgages to low-income people. Why? Banks, as we've saw, they don't want to lend to low income people. We saw that, right? They like to lend to the Joe Bezos of the world. How are you going to encourage them to lend to low income people? Well, someone along the line had the idea of turning mortgages into investment products. And when banks sell the investment products, suddenly they have an incentive to extend mortgages. The way this helps low income people is like this. Mortgages, everybody, they're also rated. Just like MICA bonds, mortgages are rated for security. A rich person's bond gets a grade of A, for example. A poor person's bond is a grade of D. And why is it a grade of D? Because there is a higher likelihood they will default. When they bundled the mortgages 20 years ago, they took the grade A mortgages and the grade D mortgages, and they put them together into an investment product and sold them to the banks, to other investors, I should say. And in so doing, this freed up funds and freed up the appetite of people to go ahead and start to give out mortgages, more mortgages, because they thought that, we're creating more investment products. What happened in 2008, everybody? What happened in 2008? And again, this is in The Big Short. I feel like I'm plugging this movie every week. The Big Short, what it reveals in 2008, you know what happened? The bottom of the real estate market fell. The bottom fell out of the real estate market. Prices plunged so far that all those mortgages that have been bundled together into these investment products, they realized these were rotten apples. So it's a very risky product. It's a very risky procedure to take mortgages and create investment products out of them. Guess what? I think it's even riskier to do that with car loans. I think there's a lot of people who have trouble paying their car loans. How could you possibly make that into an investment product? But again, everybody, this just gives you an indication of the incredible appetite, the incredible hunger for investment products out there. You know, not only in the part of investors, but also on the part of these banks who want to make money with all the transactions. They want to create these products and sell them. I hope that was okay, Chloe.
Yeah, that was actually extremely helpful. Thank you.
I would need more time to do it justice. I don't really have time, but I'm sure it'll come up again. It'll probably come up again next week. Let's talk about one other thing very important: share buybacks. This is another way, she says, in which we see the financialization of the real economy. Who can tell me what a share buyback is?
My understanding of it, which could be wrong, is that basically money made from the stock market, rather than being invested in the business, is basically offered back to shareholders to buy more shares.
You're close. You're close. Dangerously close. I need a couple of those details ironed out, everybody, or anyone. There is a buying back of shares. You are right. Who's doing the buying? Oh, Sean.
So the company itself.
The
is
company
buying back
itself.
shares to raise its own stock prices. So it's artificially inflating its stock for the shareholders' benefit, basically.
Isn't that fucking brilliant? It is a brilliant idea. A company has the power to drive up the price of its own shares. They make profits. They turn around with those profits. They buy their own shares. Stock price goes through the roof. The management team, as we'll see, the CEO and the management team, their salary is pinned to the share price. They are aligned. In many cases, the CEO is paid back in terms of shares. What do you think he's going to do with the profits? Yeah, he's going to buy back the shares. And there was a lot of criticism of this after the Trump tax cuts in 2018, right? Corporations had a big windfall. They got a lot of money back from the tax cuts. And the Republicans said, this was clear. This is pure supply side economics, what we call, remember the trickle down? They're like, oh, don't worry about it. They're going to take the money. They're going to invest it in the company. They're going to hire people. Bullshit. They bought their own stocks and sent the share price through the roof. And so that's why a lot of people were right to point out that those Trump tax breaks were a disaster for inequality. They made it much worse. That okay? You guys good? Here's a quote on 163, the bottom. In 2014, the American economist William Lazonick chronicled the scale of share buybacks in the top U.S. companies. Between 2003 and 2012, 449 companies listed on the S&P 500 index deployed $2.4 trillion in buying back their own shares, mostly through open market purchases. That sum constituted 54% of their collective earnings. 54% of their earnings were turned around to buy their shares right back again. Add in dividends, which took out a further 34%, and only dividends is what you pay out to the shareholders themselves. You can pay cash. Add in dividends, which took out a further 37%, and only 9% of profits were available for capital investment. Capital investment means investing in the company itself. They're not investing in the company itself. They're not investing in production. They're investing in their stock. They're investing in their investment. Okay. Any questions? All right, let's get into Friedman. She talks about MSV. MSV, what is that again? That's shorthand for his theory, which you read about and we debated, right? The social responsibility of business is to increase its profits. What was his argument again? Someone give us to in a nutshell.
The responsibility of the executive is to make decisions that increase shareholder value, to make more money for the shareholders, because that's who he's really working for and not the public
And
or
does he, right?
anyone else. It's the shareholders.
And he has no other concern. That is it. You must, if you're CEO, you must be like an automaton, programmed. Just create shareholder value. The reasoning? Because shareholders are the owners. Don't be all weepy and tree hugging, you know, bleeding heart. Do your fucking job. Make your money. Make money for them. MSV, by the way, this is defined on page 165. Maximizing shareholder value. Oops. She says that MSV is responsible for a lot of damage, in particular globalization. And with globalization, we see manufacturing jobs are lost. Many communities have been destroyed. How did Friedman's theory drive globalization? What do you think?
Companies can increase profits and use those to maximize shareholder value if they're exporting labor or exporting goods.
I mean, thank you, Chloe. It's awesome. Globalization is, in a way, synonymous with outsourcing, right? I told you last time we met, I told you I was talking about Naomi Klein's book, No Logo, where she talks about, you know, in the dawn, you know, where when globalization really ramped up in the 80s and 90s, she points out that these companies, as a result, they don't make things anymore. Nike does not make shoes. There's not a single Nike-owned factory in the world that makes a shoe. Nike-owned factories make advertising. Shoes, outsourced for cheap labor, right? Gap does not make clothes. They make ads. They outsource production. Okay. And so it goes. And they were able to really, you know, when they go to countries like in Asia, they were able to manufacture this stuff for much cheaper because there are no environmental regulations there and no labor laws, right? And so Chloe's right. They really ramped up the value for the shareholders. And by the way, they weren't really, these companies weren't, of course, thinking about the communities they left behind in America and the people who relied on those jobs, right? You guys, what's the name of our library, everybody at Micah? Our near forgotten library. Jeez, I used to like hanging out there. Decker. Who's Decker? Anybody know where that term comes from? Decker. I mean, you guys, Decker's famous. There's a famous product line, Decker. Blank.
Black and Decker.
Black and Decker. Yes. What's Black and Decker? What do they make? Well,
Tools, steam
what did
irons.
they make? They did make tools, but and they're based in Towson. I live in Towson. Black and Decker's headquarters was right around the corner from me, so I had to follow their saga for a long time. They had factories on the Eastern Shore and in Westminster and Carroll County. And then in the 2000s, early 2000s, they finally said, fuck it, we're out. And they went to China, I believe, first. And, you know, they outsourced everything. So they had to follow the pattern of everybody else, right? Good. Which gets us, I know we only have about 15 minutes left, but
I'm wondering, so what does it say to the companies that move their headquarters and you know, maybe some of their factories to states like Texas? And when I mean, like I heard about this like a lot of huge moves, a lot of companies from California are moving their
Tesla, dude. Tesla. Tesla is trying to be remarkable because Tesla is actually manufacturing their products here, right? They make their cars in America. Of course, I mean, well, so does Ford. What am I saying? You know, you guys know Under Armour, right? Everybody knows. If you're in Baltimore, you know Under Armour. Under Armour was started by a University of Maryland graduate like 30 years ago. And Under Armour stuck it out for a long time. And they insisted on manufacturing stuff in America, which was not easy to do. And I don't know if they still do it. Tesla, you know, is a big employer. He spent, Elon Musk, he spent billions of dollars, as she indicates in the reading, though, a lot of that money was borrowed from the US government, creating jobs here, manufacturing jobs, well-paid manufacturing jobs. Anybody know why he's trying to transfer from California to Texas?
high taxes, high cost of labor.
It's similar to what
regulatory laws.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost impossible to do business in California.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's similar concerns to what spawned outsourcing, you know, globalization. You know, Texas is seen to be a more business-friendly environment, and California is an expensive one. Yeah. Anybody else want to chime in?
I said this in a previous class, but also just that the Sun Belt, the southern part of the United States is generally an attractive place for companies that need to sell products in the US and find it cheaper to sell product or make products in the US. but don't want to like go to expensive places like New York or California.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have a lot of competition between the states in America too, increasingly California is getting to be expensive. There's a lot of debate about this, right? I mean, as Branton points out, it looks like this is a big loss for California. On the other hand, I don't know if you know this, but California on its own is the fifth biggest economy in the world. So if any state can secede, it's California. So a lot of companies are not leaving California. And there are other advantages to sticking around, which I'll leave that for you all to think on. I'm not prepared to talk about them right now, but good. Let me dive into your reading for today. We have to talk about a couple things. So basically, Friedman, his theory, she indicates, is also called it gives rise to the portfolio theory of the company. And it's the way a private equity firm looks at a company when they're going to buy it. They're like, oh, I see a portfolio of investments, right? I'm going to sell this off. I'll keep this. I'll downsize here, right? Because a company is now seen as just a collection of investments, and the interests of the shareholders are preeminent. His theory is also called shareholder theory in a much more shorthand term, because the shareholders are taken into consideration most. And as she indicates in your reading for today, the competitor is stakeholder theory. I put it in the chat. Little confusing. Shareholder theory, stakeholder. Shareholder. Whose concern are taken into account? Shareholders. That's it. Nobody else. Anybody want to tell us what stakeholder theory is? I think you're all going to like stakeholder theory much more. Chloe?
It takes into consideration the best interests of basically everyone who works within and around the company. So the management, the shareholders, but also the workers, the communities where it's based in, like it's more, I guess, devoted to common interest.
Awesome. Yeah. Here's a quote on page 185 at the top, the very top. In sharp contrast to Friedman and Michael Jensen, who advocated strongly that a company succeeds simply through profit maximization, a stakeholder view emphasizes the social relationships between management and employees, between the company and the community, the quality of the products produced, so on. Basically, stakeholder theory is the idea that there are a lot of stakeholders. There are a lot of people who have things at stake in a given company, right? So Black & Decker, they had a factory out in Westminster. Westminster is a small town west of Baltimore, about an hour. It's surrounded by farms. There are not many big employers there. There were a lot of important stakeholders in that factory. There were the people, of course, who lived. There were the workers, right? They had an immediate concern because they got a paycheck. But anybody, any other neighbors, they were concerned because suddenly this was a big chunk of the neighborhood income that was taken away. And maybe you have a lot of unemployed neighbors. The government is a stakeholder because they are reliant on a lot of income, tax revenue from that company. And the consumer too. Why isn't the consumer is a stakeholder too? Why not? Black & Decker used to be synonymous with quality. I'm not sure if that's the case anymore after being outsourced, and manufactured for pennies on the dollar. So that is the competing view here. And she's sympathetic to it. She thinks it makes sense in a lot of different ways. I'm moving ahead now to, I'm looking around page 189, 190. She's very critical of Silicon Valley as well as the finance industry. Thank you, Daniel. I didn't know. Same ownership. Goddamn. Look at that. DeWalt owned and B&D are owned by the same company. About Silicon Valley, she points out that Silicon Valley entrepreneurs have a pretty high image of themselves, right? They think they are highly productive. They think they are highly productive for the US economy. They make wonderful innovations, even at the same time as they destroy a lot. It's called creative destruction. That's what they wreak. Like Uber. Uber wrought creative destruction. The taxi industry was thrown into a frenzy, but it was good for us, right? It's good for the consumers. It's cheap, easy to use, right? Creative destruction. And you know, the tech firms, they enjoy huge profits, which they think are justified because of the value that they create. And because they have enormous wealth creating power that reverberates beyond them. And she thinks that this narrative, this is on page 190, this narrative ignores how innovation is collective, is a collective and cumulative process. Let's talk about cumulative first. How is innovation cumulative? Public funding, all right. Yes, Teresa.
Is it when she was talking about how like technologies build on each other, so like past innovations are what created the stepping stones for whatever current innovations exist?
Awesome. Yeah, it's not a straight line. No company is completely responsible for the product that, you know, the iPhone. Apple is not wholly responsible for the iPhone. It wants to reap all the profits, but it's not wholly responsible for it. The iPhone, that technology, is the end result of a cumulative process of contributions along the way, with a lot of different contributors. Here's a quote on page 192 at the bottom. To take one obvious example, innovation in personal computers, which replaced clunky mainframes, came after decades of innovation in semiconductors, in memory capacity, and in the box itself. Individual companies such as IBM were key to the introduction of personal computers in the late 1970s and 80s. But there would have been little innovation without the contribution to that lengthy process of other actors, such as the US government's investment in semiconductor research and its procurement power in the 1950s and 60s. Or later, the investments made by the US government in the internet. Or that made by companies like Xerox PARC, itself a beneficiary of large amounts of public co-funding in the development of the graphical user interface, which Steve Jobs later made use of in Apple's first Macintosh, Lisa. I did not know he named it Lisa. Anyway, you get the picture, right? The US government plays a huge role in this cumulative process. And by the way, she doesn't say it. She should have. It's the defense industry. Every step of the way, well, not every step, but a lot of it, like in digital technology, it's the defense industry. You notice that she makes a similar argument about the pharmaceutical industry. The pharmaceutical industry is a beneficiary of a lot of public funding at very basic level scientific research. But the defense industry, my cousin was in the Air Force, and he's a pilot now for, I believe it's American Airlines, or no, it's United. And he tells me that, you know, so many of the important technologies used by private you know, air transit companies, you know, just like Boeing in the manufacturing of planes, like the braking system. This was developed by the Air Force. She points out that not only is innovation cumulative and collective, it is also certain. And why is that worth raising? Well, the point being here, no company is going to either have the money to put into uncertain development, which might take years or decades. They might not, and if they do have the money that we saw with venture capital, they might not have the appetite to do it. If innovation is uncertain, that necessarily means that the US government gets involved for long-term development. And about it being collective, she has a similar argument on page 194. This is in the middle. Here she does mention the defense industry. She talks about DARPA, the CIA. GPS was developed by the Navy, right? Oh, and there she talks about the pharmaceutical industry in the middle of the paragraph on 194. In the pharmaceutical sector, research has shown that 2/3 of the most innovative drugs trace their research back to funding by the US National Institutes of Health. NIH is based in Bethesda, right down the road here. Meanwhile, some of the greatest advances in energy, from nuclear to solar to fracking, have been funded by the US Department of Energy. So Exxon has a lot to thank the Department of Energy. And here is her larger quote, and I think I'm going to start winding this down, y'all. Here's her larger point here. She makes this around 191. The tech industry, like other companies, like the finance industry as well, but the tech industry, they are happy to see the risks of innovation socialized and the profits privatized. I'm putting this in. This is on page 191, but I'm putting it in the chat. They like to see the risks socialized and the profits privatized. What that means is they don't want to bear the cost or the danger of the risks. They'd rather someone else bear the cost of the innovation and the research, right? But when it comes time to cash in, they are happy to be there, right? And her argument is that's not exactly fair, right? A lot more of these profits, instead of the profits, if the risks are being socialized, then a lot more of the profits should be socialized. That means a lot more of the profits should be shared with us. A lot of those profits should return to us. Any questions? I'm going to call your attention to something here. Just this is by way of conclusion. If you look at the top of page 223, she has a couple of recommendations that follow from this critique. She says, for example, given the immense risks the taxpayer takes when the government invests in visionary new areas like the internet, couldn't we construct ways for rewards from innovation to be just as social as the risks taken? These ways might include capping prices of publicly developed medicines. This comes after a critique of the pharmaceutical industry. Other proposals, attaching conditions to public support, such as the requirement that profits be reinvested back into production rather than spent on speculative share buybacks. She talks about the government lending money to Tesla. She points out that the government did not buy stock in Tesla, which they should have done. But they could also say to Tesla, you may borrow money from us at a very low interest rate, but you have to reinvest it in production and not buying back shares to spike your CEO salaries. She goes on, allowing public agencies to retain equity or royalties in technologies for which they provided downstream funding, like the government keeping shares of Tesla or the government keeping shares of Apple. or by making income contingent loans to businesses as we do for students. Okay. So if, broadly speaking, if the United States is a very important stakeholder, right? The shareholder theory is far too naive in her view, right? The United States government is a very important stakeholder. They're a very important investor in some of the most important ways, but they're often hidden, right? In that case, the public should see more benefits accrue to them in terms of job creation, right? In terms of public spending, in terms of tax revenue from these companies, okay? Anybody have any questions or comments? All right. Well, I'm going to let that settle for the week. You guys think on that. There was a lot today. It was an important discussion. We had to get through some important things. So I think next week I'll open up, just review a couple of the points here and, see if I can draw questions out of you then. She does make some really interesting points about the pharmaceutical industry and Google and what she calls platform capitalism. I think I want to talk about those. I will talk about Pfizer and its vaccine and how that reflects what she's talking about here regarding the pharmaceutical industry, which is a big beneficiary of the US government spending, but also in her view, someone who behaves badly when it comes to, taking advantage of consumers and, creating rents, making money from rents. Okay. And then for next week, you have Mazzucato, okay, which I think you should find a less dense reading. And that's about it. Okay. All right. So I'm going to stick around if anybody needs to talk to me. Otherwise, have yourselves a wonderful week. All right. And happy St. Patrick's Day. If anybody is hiring.
St. Patrick's Day.
Woohoo.
Thank you.
Rock on.
Thanks.
Everybody have a great week.
Yeah, sorry I missed the
Oh,
first
yeah, I'll get you now. Thanks for reminding me, Branton.
Yeah, I was at the dentist earlier, so
Okay. It happens.
sorry. Yeah. But thank you.
All right. See you later. Hello.